When this started, I confess I did not understand. I guess maybe that's how it all turned out to be. Well, such a mess.
You a teacher? Got emotions? Got a lot of emotions that overwhelm you, that threaten to burn you out? Good, because this podcast is about transforming those emotions. The emotions that come with teaching, no matter how talented, experienced, or mature you are. Because classrooms these days can be such a mess, worse than you've ever seen before. We're tempted to treat the emotions that go with such messes as problems, feelings to ignore or numb out or rail against or blame ourselves for having. Wrong. These emotions are pure gold, if you know how to read them and transform them into wisdom and focused, effective action. Think of this as the teacher's lounge you have wanted and deserved your entire teaching life. Join my co-host, Joe, and me to hear stories about and interviews with teachers who thought nothing would ever change, but when they learned how to teach through their emotions, discovered just how easy change can be. In fact, it's amazing. Welcome to Teaching Through Emotions. I'm Betsy Burris. Let's get started. Okay, so today is an interview day, and I am pleased to welcome to the podcast Arthur Chiaravalli, who is an administrator in a school somewhere. I'm not even sure where, but he can tell us.
Yeah.
I'm particularly interested in Arthur's association with an organization called Grow Beyond Grades, an organization that advocates for going gradeless, which I think is a really interesting and important idea that Arthur will talk more about as we go along. But welcome, Arthur. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, Betsy.
I want to start by asking you what Grow Beyond Grades is, what the organization is, and how you got to it.
Yeah, Grow Beyond Grades is a global movement. We have people all over the world. I think we tend to be mainly in English-speaking countries, but I think probably a close second would be Spanish-speaking, because we kind of have a little bit of a partnership with Sin Notas, which is basically without grades in Spanish, another organization that is interested in moving away from grades. We basically are a website. We're a nonprofit. We put out a blog and we have podcasts where we connect up with other educators who are questioning the role of grades in education, essentially trying to move away from them or grow beyond them, as we've been trying to kind of like talk about it more in terms of growing beyond grades than getting rid of grades, I think, recently. So it's kind of a journey that I've been on, I think, for the majority of my teaching career, but essentially, you know, we feel that grades just don't accommodate much of what we want to do in terms of teaching and learning. And we try to find ways of, frequently through portfolios, through self-assessment, through narrative evaluations, of making that manageable for teachers so that they can really put the focus back on learning and the relationships that happen in the classroom and the motivation that, you know, seems to happen sort of naturally when that's not the focus.
So you are not advocating no assessment, growing beyond assessment. You advocate assessment. It's the grading, the grades that you object to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good distinction. You know, I think a lot of people in our sphere talk about the etymology of assessment. It comes from the Latin, to sit beside. Come to find out, actually, because a lot of people have gotten a lot of mileage out of that it was this legal person who sat beside someone who was wrangling about legal things related to property, you know, back in the day, actually, which doesn't feel as humane. And so I feel like I want to start moving away from that. They were kind of like this paralegal type person.
Legalistic, like making sure you toe the line.
Like they would go around and kind of look at how much property, you know, a person would have, and are they being assessed? Is the tax being assessed appropriately, or do we need to raise the taxes on this person? So For everyone who's used that metaphor in the past, you might want to move away from it. I used it quite a bit myself. But yes, I think that's a good way of stating the distinction, that definitely there is a role for assessment. It's when we get into that sort of ego-involved assessment that involves putting a score on things. That's when the focus begins to get off of learning, and students begin to look for the easiest way to get the highest possible grade. And that doesn't really lend itself to the kind of learning that I think we want in our classrooms.
Right. You make me think of the other word for assessment that we use, which is evaluation, which, whether you know Latin or not, I'm guessing has to do with valuing, which implies that there's a value. There are like better ways of learning than others, which also doesn't seem like it's what we're after as educators.
Yeah, I think it means to take value out of is technically what it is.
Right.
But I'm actually somewhat comfortable with that idea too. I mean, if that's something that can happen in dialogue, it becomes an issue where it becomes monologic, where it's the teacher who is the sole arbiter of value.
Nice.
And that's partially the reason why I kind of still like the assessment idea. If we're imagining, a teacher and a student sitting side by side.
Yes.
And being able to kind of have a conversation about what learning is taking place.
So maybe like e-assessment, like sitting down to pull out the value together.
I like that. I think
we can come up with a new word.
You've coined something there.
Well, so what brought you to the notion of going gradeless? I know you just stated that, I guess originally it was let's go gradeless, and then you've kind of evolved in your understanding of the possibilities of going gradeless. You're asking teachers not to grow beyond grades rather than be radical, be that extreme.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I definitely came out of the standards-based learning and grading tradition, and I think that's true of a lot of us in K-12. A lot of the people who are part of the ungrading, if you've heard that term used frequently, are higher ed, coming out of more of a, Peter Elbow and Daniel Witt's kind of contract grading tradition. But I think a lot of us who are gradeless are really K-12 coming out of standards-based grading. And I think standards-based grading in many ways just revolutionized grading. And I'm very grateful for standards-based grading for taking a lot of the focus off of those sort of idiosyncratic, non-academic, non-learning based things that could factor into grades.
The subjectivity, basically.
Yeah, and also just things that are just patently not equitable, like turning things in on time frequently has to do with, having a clean workspace and not having lots of responsibilities at home, plenty of time to get things done. Those kinds of things that factor into grades, along with bringing in canned foods or Kleenex for extra credit or, whatever else. There were so many different things that went into grades. I think before standards-based grading came on the scene and said that it really needs to be about the learning, and that those other kind of things maybe can be reported elsewhere, if we're talking about behavioral things or other things that people can do to bring, good things to the community, need to be recorded and reported elsewhere. And the strength of standards-based grading is that it put that focus on clear learning goals, separating behavior from academic performance. And then the other thing, as I kind of implied earlier, is it opens up that door to retakes and revisions, because speed of learning really shouldn't be factoring into the grade either. So that revolutionized things. I'm very glad that I came into that very early in my career, and that I think, I maybe had 2 years of teaching prior to hearing about standards-based grading.
So how long have you been teaching?
25 years in education at this point, 20 years as a teacher. Wow. Started out in alternative education, and I think it was really clear to me immediately, hearing about standards-based grading, how much my grades up to that point were a reflection of things that were outside of school,
Wow.
and frequently outside of my students' control.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think it was really timely to be able to get that message and to be able to move forward with that. And I think it helped me a lot to really value the different ways that students were demonstrating their learning and the different paces at which students were demonstrating their learning. And I think it helped me to be a much more equitable assessor of student learning. So it was awesome in many ways. And, in the 2008 kind of economic, what do we call that? Like collapse? Crash. Our alternative school shut down because,
Oh.
it was happening around the No Child Left Behind era. So, I mean, our dashboard looked terrible. I mean, we made a lot of progress with students, but frequently students were coming to us, woefully behind in both skills and credit. We were all shuffled off to the mainstream schools, whether that be the middle school or the high school. I got sent to the high school. And so I had much bigger classes again. And I started out in math, where that actually worked pretty well, I guess the way that it's taught. And I wasn't teaching in a very sophisticated way at that point. It's easy, to kind of assess. Frequently, it's like homework, quizzes, tests, basically.
They're
And
right answers are not right
I
answers.
wasn't doing anything special. Certainly, there's been a lot of great thinking around that, and there are a lot of members of our community who do way more than that and way cooler things. But that was my reality upon arriving at the mainstream high school. But then I had an opportunity to go back to my major, which was English language arts, and doing that at scale and doing standards-based grading at scale. And I think two things that I noticed is, one, it became all about the grade. It didn't matter that I was doing it in kind of like a standards-based way. It was still about the grade. And I saw kids who were chasing that grade more than anything. Were not terribly interested in learning. Actually, even more so than my alternative students.
Wow.
It's very interesting. My
Yeah.
alternative students were much more open to learning than were the mainstream students, who were totally focused on just getting the highest grade with the least amount of effort. And they were stretched thin. I mean, it makes total sense. So I think the other thing that I noticed was I just couldn't sustain it. So not only was I grading a lot of papers now, papers. I was trying to do it in a little bit of a standards-based way, which means that I was encouraging revisions.
Right, exactly.
And so I'm not just getting in the grade book once. I'm getting in the grade book potentially multiple times.
Yes.
And it was just unsustainable. One, I'm struggling to even maintain this system. And two, the students aren't intrinsically motivated by anything that I'm doing. And in fact, I think the thing that so many of us notice is that students, when they get back a paper, they don't look at any of the feedback. They just flip to the back, look at the rubric, and then either put it in their bag or recycle it. Yeah. And so there was something about this whole system that just did not make sense from, both the teacher perspective or from the student perspective.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
I didn't know all the reasons behind that. I just knew that something had to change. So yeah, that was the beginning of the end for grades
Wow.
in my world.
So what did you do? I mean, I taught writing for many years and totally understand what is it? It's like being underwater for all of your working life, never getting through those papers and having to read the same paper several times with very few changes made. It was just impossible and really maddening in some cases too.
Yeah.
Right? So, and you don't want to get mad at your students for not caring about this assignment that you've given them enough to do a better job for every draft. So I get it. What did you do though?
Yeah. Well, I basically was sitting in a hotel room. I'd gone to NCTE in 2016.
National Council of Teachers of English.
Yes, in Atlanta. And I was sitting in my hotel room and I was presenting on kind of an unrelated topic there. And I was doing this calculation in my mind, like, I'm going to have to skip a lot of these sessions because I had this whole pile of papers.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking about this. I'm almost thinking about it like I'm an addict. I mean, I hate a person who is in the throes of an addiction, because it was like, will my colleagues notice that I haven't been at any of the sessions or that I wasn't around for lunch? I mean, that's...
Wow. I love that metaphor.
Yeah, what is it that they say? Like, you're only as sick as your secrets. You know, when they talk, I think that's one of the things that they say in Alcoholics Anonymous is you're only as sick as your secrets. But I mean, it was a source of shame that I was going to have to do this, but I had this pile of papers, some of which are going on like 1 or 2 weeks late.
Yep.
And I'm just going to have to buckle down and do this. It was in that moment. That was the moment of clarity for me. I was like, I am not going to do this.
Wow.
I am going to go to this conference. I'm going to become a better teacher. I'm going to go to all these sessions, and, you know, I'm going to do something else. And so at that point, I had known about this method of letter to class. I don't know if you know Todd Finley.
No.
I believe he's at Eastern Carolina University, ECU now, their teacher education program. But he comes out with a lot of these kind of cool things, but it's called Letter to Class. And it's basically you read probably like a quarter or a third of the papers. You notice what are the strengths and what are the weaknesses. And as an English language arts teacher, you know this. When you're a quarter of the way through, you know what they all are.
Right.
And if you're going to be mad by the end of it because it's the same darn thing. So you read like a quarter of the papers, you make note of those things, and then you give this letter to the class, and then you allow them to look and inspect their own writing for where those things, you know, either those good things happen or those areas where there's some need to grow happened. And you give them that opportunity also to self-assess based on some of the feedback that you give, expert feedback that you get. So the tricky thing with that, though, is that can't be entered into the grade book.
Yeah.
Because
you still have to validate it.
You just looked at 25% of the papers. That's when I knew, and I'd been thinking about this leading into the year, that I'm not going to be able to grade this year. I'm going to have to pull the Band-Aid off. This is like November. I'm going to have to pull the Band-Aid off. We are not going to have grades in the grade book this year. And it was probably 2 or 3 weeks after that. So I did that. And I saw students totally dialed in. I mean, I think they were a little bit shocked that this was happening, but I saw many of them dialed in, probably just partially out of the state of shock that they were like, okay, what the heck's going on? I guess I'm going to be looking at my paper now. Right. But a few weeks later, my principal kind of caught me in the hallway and asked me if I was going to put any grades in the grade book. And I was like, well, I'm kind of doing this thing where, you know, I hadn't even thought it all out, but it was like November and I didn't have any grades in the grade book. And so since that point, you know, in my remaining years as a teacher, I found ways of making it look a little bit more respectable when people go into the grade book, and I can kind of keep people off my back while I'm doing what I know counts for teaching and learning in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, the rest is history.
I'm just so interested. I just want to say how interesting it is that a major source of data for people outside your classroom about whether or not you're teaching is the grades in your grade book.
Right. Yeah. Isn't that scary?
It is scary. I mean, I've heard from teachers who hear from parents these days, because they're all online and they're checking their kids' grades. I don't see any grade in the grade book, assuming that they're the only evidence of learning. I mean, as opposed to maybe talking to your kid about the latest paper they wrote. It's an interesting pressure,
Yeah.
right? It's an interesting message that
Yeah.
you picked up on, that your principal was actually teaching you. Grades are what matter. Whatever you're doing in the classroom or with the students' work matters less to me than that you're filling in the grid.
Isn't that fascinating? Yeah. I mean, it just it short circuits things for everyone. I mean, it's definitely ego involved for the student, but I think that it's also, sucks up all the air for everyone else too.
Right.
And, I'll tell you a deep, dark secret of mine is that actually what I wrote about for my master's thesis for my master's in curriculum and instruction was about what a big difference the 24/7 grade book makes in terms of getting students to succeed. This was my thesis, is that I used a very early 24/7 online grade book. I can't even remember what it's called. And it's all this master's thesis is on a dead computer somewhere. But by providing this window into the classroom, it's actually going to help parents to hold their students accountable. And, it's going to bring all sorts of stakeholders to the table of students making sure that they're staying on top of their work. And that was the point I was trying to make at that point. And in retrospect, I mean, the 24/7 grade book has just been an absolute blight on education.
Right.
And it's this portal that gives out this information that is not helpful, I think, to anyone involved. And it basically just sets up a criterion that you're always behind. You're never quite up to snuff.
Yeah. It feels like it puts a hell of a lot of pressure on teachers, actually.
Yes.
That when I speak to teachers about this kind of situation, it feels as though they feel the pressure to get something in the grade book. The students aren't feeling that pressure, which is interesting because the students are the ones who should be, not that I feel as though we want to pressure students, but in fact, the learning is theirs. And
Absolutely.
providing the evidence of the learning should be something that they are feeling strongly about, not just to get the grades, but to actually, well, of course, we're educators. We want them to actually embrace learning. But
Yeah.
It is weird how grades can become the focus, which is basically, as you say, when the teacher is the only arbiter, the sole arbiter of the value of the student's learning, then the pressure is all on you.
Yeah, there is some kind of power there that people may not really like to let go of. I mean, when you talk about letting go of grades, or even talking about standards-based grading, where it's taking a little bit of that performance pressure or performance anxiety off of teaching and learning, you get a lot of pushback because people really feel they need that. They need that carrot and stick in order to have the power they rely on. That's a little bit of a Faustian bargain because you end up on the hook.
Yeah, right.
Because you are the sole arbiter. There's power in that, yes, but you're also the one who's totally under scrutiny.
It's so interesting to just think about the carrot and the stick and the assumptions underlying that approach to teaching and learning, which is that we've got to make them learn.
Yeah.
That there isn't any intrinsic value to what
No,
we're
there
asking
isn't.
them to do. So we have to force them. We have to almost bully them, either seduce them or coerce them.
Yep.
And grades are the outcome of that relationship to learning.
Mm-hmm. Totally. That's it in a nutshell. And I like the point that you were making earlier about they need to be involved in that process, because what also ends up happening on their side of it is they get lulled into this passivity.
Yes, yes.
And they think that the grade is going to tell the story for them.
Yes, yes.
And it doesn't.
Yeah.
It has
Beautiful.
no exchange value anymore, So, I mean, no one believes that this means anything anymore.
That's so
And
true.
so, you need to be able to tell your story. No one else can tell that story for you. And we need to be advocates for students. And a lot of times we're the ones who needs to recognize that in students, especially since they've been lulled into passivity. Maybe future generations who have not been lulled into passivity will have a better ability to tell their own stories.
Yeah.
But I think we need to be the ones who help them to notice those things of value when they do them, and help them and encourage them to curate that and talk about that, and then help them to build that muscle about talking about what they've done,
Yes.
talking
Yes.
about their learning, talking about what their goals are and what's important, what's significant to them. And I think that lends itself really well to the fact that many of us, quote unquote, gradeless teachers have really leaned into portfolios
Yes.
as being that robust substitute for the traditional strictures of the grade book. We're not just going to march lockstep across the field of the grade book.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to give you an opportunity to get in the habit of curating those things, reflecting on them, and saying what you're proud of about this.
Yeah.
And about your process and what other people should notice.
Yes. I love that you just said process. That's what I've been thinking here, is that grades actually only reflect the product.
Absolutely.
Right. So it's a total product orientation. But really, what is learning? If not a process, it is a process. It's actually not a product ever, because are we ever done? So
No.
I love it. I think portfolios, self-evaluation or peer evaluation, or talking about an idea that you are going to write about, talking about what it is like right now to write this paper, talking
Right.
about how am I thinking through this math problem, or talking
Right.
about it in a way that allows students to not know also.
Right.
Right? How much more fun that is for us, certainly for me, than it
Yep.
is to actually come up with, my final conclusion. And who wants to do that? Who can ever feel good about that final
Yeah.
outcome? So I love it that you said process. I think that's what we really should be looking at, is how
Well,
to evaluate the process of learning and the process of teaching.
Yeah. And I think that's another drawback of standards-based grading too,
Mhm.
is because it puts that emphasis on the quote unquote summative assessment is the
Yes.
only one that contributes to the top line grade.
Exactly.
I understand the philosophy behind that, but in practice, that has ended up being, in a lot of cases, putting even more emphasis on that final product.
Yes.
That's why I even understand, and this has really kind of revolutionized some of the ways I think about it with when I started becoming acquainted with some of the ungraders out there, or labor-based graders out there, which is just like anathema to it's just standards-based grading. I mean, the idea that we're actually just going to take some stupid thing like how much time you spend working on something, and that's going to be the basis of your grade.
Wow.
Why? Because we don't want to get into discussions about quality.
Huh.
We want to just take care of what the institution wants. So we're going to do this stupid little thing where I put in enough time, you'll get an A. And in the meantime, we're having all the conversations that count.
Wow.
And it's like, you just need to put in the time. I mean, that's all it is with being an artist. And actually, this is true of being a writer. You just need to put in the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you will become the writer that you're supposed to be. Rather
Love
than
it.
me having a rubric about what quality looks like. And I think you can have conversations about what good looks like when it comes to writing and about when it comes to art. And I think we certainly can and should bring our expertise to bear on those conversations, involving students in it as well, allowing them to notice sort of what good looks like. But
Exactly.
there's also this aspect, I think, in both of those areas and probably many other areas as well, where it's just like, if you put in the time, you're going to turn into a really good writer, and you will be a good writer in a way that is totally different than any other writer.
Yeah.
We don't need a learning trajectory for that.
Yeah.
We just need you to put in the time and put in the
Right.
work.
And it makes me think that one of the things that I was thinking a lot about when I was teaching writing was just the question of thinking. That to separate writing from thinking is wrong. in my view, and then to make students write who have no thoughts in their heads and don't really want to have thoughts in their heads, or certainly don't have thoughts around the topics that I was asking them to think about. I'm thinking about freshman composition right now, which was a hellhole of a course to teach.
Yeah.
So, and if they didn't have many thoughts or concerns about anything academic, but surely they could talk about the frat party last night, right? Like that wasn't a paper I could assign. Although
Right.
my favorite and most popular assignment in freshman comp was the outrageous claim essay, where I asked
Mm,
students to write an essay to craft the most outrageous claim they could think of and write that
mm,
essay. Make up evidence. I don't care. I didn't care. You could make up quotes, make up characters. Just show me that you could think about something
right.
that interested you. And one of my favorite claims I remember was, every woman should look like Barbie. Great
Nice.
outrageous claim. Let's see how you prove this one. But it's
Yeah.
just so fun. So, how to make writing fun, how to make thinking fun was really what I was concerned about. How to seduce kids, how to make them want to think about something that could count as academic, given that they
Yeah.
were in a college, a university.
Yeah. And when you take away grades, one of the things that you notice is just how boring your writing assignments are.
Are exactly.
And then we might also notice something about our students, that they have no meaning and purpose in their lives. And we need to come to grips with that if we're
Mm-hmm.
ever going to be able to move
Mm-hmm.
past it. If there is just a whirling void underneath all of that, I want to know about it now,
Yeah.
rather than keep covering it up with this veneer of fake motivation,
Fake topics.
fake
Right. I'm also
topics.
reminded of a guy that I knew through NCTE who does what he calls the Creed Project,
Mm,
where he has his students write about their values, about themselves and their values and what matters to them, what they care about. It's been a long time since I read about the project, but their writing is all about themselves, getting
yeah.
to know themselves, but talking about themselves, not just in subjective ways, but in kind of rigorous ways. Like, this
Mm-hmm.
is what I value, and this is how I'm living up to my values, that kind of
Mm,
thing, which
mm-hmm.
is really, those are fantastic writing assignments. And
Yeah.
he does very well. His students do extremely well with this approach
Right.
to writing.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know what's inside yourself, then how are you going to be talking about Emil Durkheim?
Right.
All right. So I think we've kind of covered this. I just wonder if teachers listening to this need to be more convinced, than what you've already talked about. I mean, what's good about grades? I mean, why would teachers continue to grade their students?
Well, and I think the original reason was just scaling up public education. Education wasn't a universal thing. And then it was just like, we need shorthand for the number of students that we now have. And that's kind of my understanding of at least one of the sources of grades has been just that sort of record keeping and reporting aspect of it. So in some ways, it's good for that. I think that it can serve as shorthand, and that's probably one of the benefits of it.
Mm.
With some of the tools that have come online, at least over the course of my career, I feel like that reason is fading in importance. Where I do have, a nice portfolio platform where we can curate some cool stuff, and I can coax people over to that platform because the grade book is so lame in comparison.
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
this is where the cool stuff is happening. And then being able to record my feedback
Mm-hmm. Oh,
and
nice.
ask them to jot that at the top of a subsequent attempt. That's kind of the cool thing with English language arts. We don't have many advantages when it comes to assessing and providing feedback, but one of them is that we are recursive when we end up doing a lot of the same things over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Same skills.
Put in the time.
That's something where it's like you can parlay this feedback into the next writing assessment.
Yes.
It's not like we're moving on to an entirely different topic.
Right.
And then I think one of the other critiques has been just like, who's going to process all this information at some later date? Well, one, most gradeless teachers interface with the grade book toward the end. We usually have student involved kind of portfolio conferences. And we come up with a grade that is going to go in there with some kind of modicum of fairness. And I talk about my process for interfacing with the grade book. But I think we're getting to the point where actually even admissions offices are going to be able to process narrative portfolios as is.
Yes.
And we're going to have to really make sure that we're, keeping our eyes open as we go into this, I think, this new era where I think that we are going to be able to send these sort of rich reports of artifacts and evidence and narrative and self-assessment and the potential of finding a really good fit between student and maybe what it is, either the campus or the work opportunity that they're interested in, of making that a better fit, I think is going to be so much better than if we just have these raw numbers, which tell us absolutely nothing and less with each passing year.
Yeah. Wow, I have so many thoughts, one of which is a student I once worked with who said, if I get less than an A+, then I have not done my job. And she said, what I do is I suss out what the teacher wants and I give it to them. So there's a statement about grades.
We've turned a whole generation of students into nihilists, basically.
Right. And well, they should. I mean, the students who actually object to grades, like your continuing ed students who are like, yeah, I'm happy to learn, but I'm not going to play the grade game. I love that kind of student.
Right.
I guess the way I think about grades, now that I think of it, in my own teaching and in the teaching I do of teachers, which is often instructional design, the grade really is a reflection of how well the teacher has done. That is, in my classes, the way I design them, everyone's going to get an A. Because everyone's going to get where they need to go. They're going to grasp the end result, the final assessment, I call it. That is, the culmination of everything we've done together is going to be some sort of performance. It could be a portfolio, could be a debate, it could be any number of kind of natural acts. I always try to design and encourage teachers to design a final assessment that captures everything that matters about that course so that students can show you that they got it and that it's fun. Right. So for me, and I've worked with teachers who are like, oh, I get in trouble if every student in my class gets an A. Of course, I've got to have the normal curve. I'm like, bullshit.
Yeah.
What do you mean? What's normal about that? Normal teaching, good teaching to me is I'm doing everything I need to do with each of my students to get them where they need to go that we've agreed on. This is where we're headed. So I'm aiming at giving all A's. And the meaning of the A in that case is look at the final assessment. This is what they're able to do. Or look at the objectives of the course. This is what they're able to do. Ideally, here's the narrative that goes along with the A that actually defines this grade for you all, right? And I just have to say, too, I used to teach at Bennington College, and we did nothing but pass and the narrative assessment.
Well, that's my personal preference is, both with individual assignments and end of the marking period of the semester, end of the course is just pass, fail, narrative assessment. That's what I experienced, actually. The first time I experienced that was at University of Michigan's residential college. Is, in a lot of these different colleges, especially during the late 60s and 70s, went down this path.
Yes.
And unfortunately, University of Michigan's residential college has gone away from this just because concerns about, grad schools aren't going to necessarily take it seriously or whatever. And it's just like, well, that's too bad, and actually, first of all, I don't think that there's a ton of evidence for that. Maybe they see something that I don't see, but from what I've heard, actually, if anything, it has people spend more time with your transcript, which doesn't hurt in terms of those determinations. And then I think the other thing I mentioned earlier is that I think that's going to be a non-issue very soon.
I hope so. So back to Grow Beyond Grades.
Yeah.
How do teachers or schools interact with your website? How do they use your nonprofit?
We haven't entirely figured that out exactly, but our website is probably the first place, the doorway into what we offer. And I think one of the things that we've realized as we've begun this process, me and some of the other people who are involved in getting this thing off the ground, is we had a certain way that we were going about this and growing beyond grades. I think what we've come to find out is that there are a lot of different ways to grow beyond grades. One of the things that I think we didn't realize at the time was just this sort of tacit assumption that everything should be standardized in education, and maybe that's because we came out of that testing era where everything needed to be standardized, or because we came out of the best practices era, where we take something that worked one place and just hook, line, and sinker, try it somewhere else. All that is based on this assumption that teaching is not something that's situated, that needs to be in dialogue with whatever it is, those values of the community where you're situated. And so I think at first I was kind of imagining like, okay, at some point we're going to do Grow Beyond the Grades, the book, which we actually are doing finally, and we're working toward. But, it's like, it's not going to be this paint by numbers kind of thing. And I think what you need to do is, whether you're coming to our site or looking elsewhere, is you need to find those different stories of just people. I think we're very teacher-centered. I think one of the interesting things about standards-based grading is almost everyone who is a recognized leader in that field has not been in the classroom in years.
Wow.
Is either a researcher or someone else. And I think one of the strengths of our organization is that it's people who are finding their way to something that feels authentic, both for them and for others.
Oh, that's nice.
So, just like getting to the point where it's a very vast repository and it's searchable by topic, and you can read and listen to these stories and find inspiration and things that are applicable to your own situation.
Love it.
So I think that's the best place to start. We've done less interactive stuff. Back in the day, we did Twitter chats, RIP Twitter. That's no longer happening.
There's a lot of peace there.
No, and we've done community gatherings. We do those from time to time, which are sort of online. We use kind of a premium version of a Google Meet where lots of people can come to these and we can go into breakout rooms and do different things. We do that from time to time. I have to be honest, I am super busy at work working on this book. And so I'm just barely keeping the lights on at the website. Yeah. But I think there's something about this moment where I feel like it's time to get this into a book. And give it that kind of dignity, because I feel like things are sort of devolving online.
Wow.
So we'll see what the next iteration brings. I've done some in-person things. I like that we're working on a book that we're going to be able to get into people's hands. I might like doing pamphlets at some point, but definitely go to our website, growbeyondgrades.org.
growbeyondgrades.org. It'll be in the show notes.
Okay.
I just want to say, I think what's beautiful about your project is that it seems to me that most, if not all, teachers get it, right? They get the need to be thinking differently about grades. Most, if not all, are burdened by grading, whether they've thought about the kind of concepts behind grading or not. They know that it's a burden. They have to get them in. They have to correct everything. And so it's almost like whatever you do, you will be tapping into a kind of a form of suffering that just about every teacher experiences. And that, sad to say, that's often what gets people to change, is the suffering. They want to avoid the pain. So you've got a lot of pain out there that you're offering solutions to. And it sounds as though, there are a variety of different approaches. I think teachers are also people who absorb really easily ideas from other people, but they're not wholesale borrowers or like adopters. It feels like the teachers I know would be like, oh, that's interesting. It won't work that way in my classroom, but I can figure out how it's going to fit. And I think that could be so thrilling for teachers to feel as though I hate grades. It's either I have to do what I'm doing or I'm not going to do it at all, and then I'm going to lose my job. But for you to help them kind of find a middle ground where there's a way for them to reduce their suffering and maybe the suffering of their teachers that
Yeah.
works for them.
And I think that was kind of one of the reasons why we pivoted from Teachers Going Gradeless was originally our name for several years, and to grow beyond grades. I mean, there's a few different reasons for that, but I think that the idea of, I don't know if you remember the group Teachers Throwing Out Grades. It just felt cavalier, I think, to a lot of people. And it's not like being cavalier is bad all the time, but there's a way in which that's really kind of a privilege that
Yes.
certain
Yes.
people are able to do and other people are not because
Yes.
of their precarity, as a
Yes.
teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one reason. But I do think that Grow Beyond Grades kind of captures that idea that what we're working on, and I hate to say, I mean, it's getting old to say the 21st century now, but what we're working on is so much more than what grades can even capture. So when we do talk about sort of what are those skills that are so important in the 21st century, it's like creativity, collaboration, and you just can't grade that in the way that you can whatever those 20th century skills were.
Yeah.
One, it's just so hard to parse what happened, because it's not that easily measurable thing that you're looking at. Two, I think you do violence to the thing itself when you try to treat it in that way. Believe me, I tried to create rubrics that would capture this or that poem or whatever, but ultimately you're making yourself even more the arbiter of this thing that, I mean, you can talk about it, you can have a dialogue about it, but you really can't measure it.
You're making me think that this is a way I feel about education also kind of generally, is there's a basic distrust of what teachers know, a basic distrust of teachers and teaching, that the more we standardize the objectives, but the testing, the more we're trying to do an end run around teachers and ensure that somebody out there in charge can be
satisfied
that the students learned what the students are supposed to learn. I just want to say that approach to education does a couple things. Number one, it completely invalidates what is true about teaching that we all rely on, which is that teachers know stuff. They know it when they see it. They feel it all the time. They know when a kid has an aha moment, that's not something you grade. It's not something they put in a paper or on a math test, right? You know it's there. You know they're growing. You know they're relating. They're forming relationships with ideas, with acts of learning, etc. And the other thing is that, it feels as though with this highly standardized approach to education, people are coming out dumber.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Just what you're saying, like the job is not to think or to learn or to grow. It's to get the best grade with the least amount of effort. So really justify for me, world, why we're standardizing everything and assuming that teachers know nothing about their students, that they spend, hours a week with and know fairly well. Just in terms of being learners, I wish we would appreciate and validate and glorify teachers' intuitions.
Yeah. And there is an aspect of that where I think even teachers have been lulled into a kind of passivity too. I mentioned that a little bit about students having been lulled into a state of passivity that we may need to kind of rouse them out of. I think similarly, you think about teachers' sort of reverence for AP classes and that kind of thing. It's like, we got to jostle them out of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think the toughest part about it is to jar the student out of that passivity, but we need to jar teachers out of that passivity too. I think there's a way in which gradeless or ungrading can also do a little bit of that deprofessionalizing, if it's approached in a certain way. I mentioned that I really like that sort of binary kind of thing in lieu of grading. If you want to put it this way, I pulled fewer punches as a gradeless teacher than I did as a grading teacher. So if you want to come at me with an accusation of this isn't rigorous, that's BS, because one of the things that slowed me down as a grader was I was constantly thinking about, how am I going to defend this 2.5 that I'm about to give this kid? Or even, I mean, as time went on, it was like a 3.5. How am I going to defend this 3.5?
Exactly.
And so I noticed myself slowing down. Whereas with the binary, I'm not like, okay, is this a 1 point? Is this going to pass at least? It was just like, I would give it back to them.
Yeah.
It's not done. I mean,
Right.
it's just not done. So no check at this point.
Yeah.
And I'm not even going to waste my breath on this right now.
Yeah. Love it.
And so, there are some people, and a few of them come to mind as I'm even saying this, who are the most curmudgeonly gradeless teachers. And there's an aspect of this that it's like your true self comes out in a way that it doesn't in that whole standardized milieu.
In a way that makes you useful. You can be useful to the students if you're actually being honest with them.
Yeah.
And being curmudgeonly about the quality of a student's work is not unloving. It's not uncaring. It's actually the opposite. And I think some students can learn that, yes, you care enough to actually tell me the truth. Right? I love, I do want to say, though, I'm thinking about some teachers who might be working with students who really, really lean on or depend on the grades that they get.
Right.
And I'm thinking, you would probably agree with this too, that if grades are a language that a teacher and a student, or a teacher and a class, completely understand, if they know what the grades mean, if they know how the grades function as a motivation, as an inspiration, do it. Do what feels right to you. But from my point of view, it can only work if the students know how to read the evaluation process that their teachers are going through, that this grade means this.
Right.
And I can tell you that you did this well and this well and this well. And that is why, right? I'm sure that worked with some teachers and with some students. And in a way, it's a version of gradelessness in that the grades are taking on a role or a meaning that regular old throwing grades up in your Canvas, whatever, don't carry, right?
Right. I mean, again, I think I just come back to the idea of needing to be in dialogue a lot more than we're used to being in dialogue, because the whole thing has been built up around a monologue that we've gotten very used to doing.
Love it.
But I do think your point is good that, I mean, it reminds me a little bit about Lise Delpit says about writers' workshops, where it feels like this, I don't have the clear mile markers or the clear direction that I need to get to where I want to go.
Yeah.
And that can be inequitable, and that there can be students who are very much advantaged in that sort of invisibility.
Yep.
And we need to be very aware of that. And I think that's one of the things that I think labor-based grading tries to do. And I've never been a practitioner of that. Salbi Inoue is kind of the person who wrote the book on that topic. And I think to give them those measurable things, in terms of time put in.
Yeah.
Of like, do this and you will get that. And let's stop talking about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then once you got that, you're going to move on to that. So it's a whole progression. It's a process.
Right. So give them that little thing and make it even more visible than anything that was done previously, because those conversations about quality can also be very opaque, I think, to students.
Yep.
And they definitely, as Salbi Inoue points out, privilege white ways of knowing and writing. And so I put it in these terms. I don't think Salbi Inoue puts it in these terms. Put it off on something stupid, like the amount of time.
Yeah.
Give something for students to hold on to so that they feel like that is not something they're going to have to worry about.
That they know what accomplishment is.
Yeah.
Okay, I spent a half hour working on this piece or whatever. I spent a half hour
Right.
doing scales. I'm thinking about musicians. So they have a means of measuring what is unmeasurable.
Right. And then you have the lesson, you have the personal lesson with your guitar teacher or whatever, and they'll give you some things about how you're using your pick. But I mean, like, they can give you that, and that's probably not going to show up anywhere.
Exactly.
But
It's
the time is important. I think it comes back to that. I think the thing that is totally ignored and in some ways devalued by standards-based grading is that kind of Malcolm Gladwell 10,000 hours idea.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. You can get this done in a semester.
Right. Or like at the last minute. And I mean, if you knock it out of the park, then I guess I have to give you a 4-point.
Right?
You should not knock it out of the park if you just started it last night.
Exactly. Well, a friend once asked me, so do you think that kids can learn to write in 2 weeks? And I said, no. And he hasn't really talked to me since then because he was doing a program. He wanted to do a 2-week summer program he could guarantee students would improve their writing. Well, no, I don't think so. But
Right.
Go for it. Go right on ahead.
Yeah.
But I love that. It does take time. And to put time in means you have to be devoted. You have to care enough to do it. And I don't know how we get students to do that, but I guess
Relationship is a big part of it.
Relationship, exactly.
And
not
grades,
just with the teacher,
that's
but
a
with
big
the
part of
content,
grades.
right? And with the skill.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, the quickest way to ruin your relationship with students is grades. I mean, it's not even the bad grades. It's the good grades. I mean, and because they're either going to become complacent and sort of look down on you as being just
You're
this
easy.
pushover.
Yep.
Or they're going to feel discouraged and, despise you. And both of those are dehumanizing to the teacher, dehumanizing and deprofessionalizing to the teacher.
Wow.
Because there's so much more than that.
Exactly. I think that's a really good note to end on. Let's rehumanize teachers and students.
Yeah.
And I just love it. Arthur, thank you so much. Is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
I don't think so. I think we just followed a really interesting trajectory that I think felt very organic. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other topics, but I don't know what they are at this point.
So we've done a good job. If we both feel satisfied, please, if you like what you've heard, subscribe to this podcast and leave a review on your podcast app, letting others know what you like about it. It really helps. Bring people in, get them to hear some of the ideas that we've been talking about. They're all so important, and we want teachers to be feeling great about what they do all day long, the important work that they do. So Arthur, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your hard work and your wisdom. It's been really fun talking to you.
It's been a blast. Thanks so much for having me, Betsy.
I want to thank the teacher whose story we just told or who consented to be interviewed for their generosity and wisdom and commitment to teaching greatly. You rock. Here are a few more people who rock. Joe Johnson, of course, my super fun and thoughtful co-host. My endlessly patient and talented creative partner and strategist, Julian Andrukaya. My brother, Tom Burris, whose song Lifetime, from his amazing album Jabbering Trout, check it out, ushers us into and out of teaching through emotions. My astute script editor and creative genius, Brad Wells. And my son, Wilder, artist extraordinaire, who is constantly blowing me away with his effortless talent. Thank you, one and all. Run to the Teaching Through Emotions Substack right now to find all my writing, my podcast, newsletter, and more. That's teachingthroughemotions.com. Subscribe. Get my stuff in your inbox automatically. If you are a teacher with a story, I'd love to hear it. You can contact me directly and confidentially on my Substack. Again, go to teachingthroughemotions.com and click on Share a Story. And check out the show notes below for how to access my resources. I mean it. Suffering in silence gets you nowhere. Telling your story is the first step towards understanding and relief. Contact me. Chew through and pop those terrible teaching emotions. You will feel better.